Good morning, church. You might notice the McMillans aren't here today. They went on a wonderful vacation to Saskatchewan. But it's nice for us to give them a break, and this is kind of what it looks like to give Billy a break, is we're going to have a bunch of teenagers up here. I wanted to wait. I think I want to say this now because it's so relevant. Guys, you have no idea how proud of you we all are. It is, and I hear this consistently, our youth, our young people are the pride of our church. And we are just so grateful. You might be thinking that this all comes together quite easily. It doesn't. I do want to say a special thank you. If you haven't had a chance to meet our intern, he's our youth intern, Owen. You've seen him up here a number of times. He's the gnarly-looking one, like he belongs in a rock band. He put in a great deal of work to organize the instrumental piece and all of the singing. And the biggest hurdle is building up some confidence because some of you don't understand how talented you are. And so thank you so much for your willingness to serve, and thank you, Owen, for putting this together. Today, we're going to continue our series about when words fail. But really, we are going to start focusing on the portion of this that might be a little bit more positive. So we're going to talk a little bit about when words don't fail today. And more specifically, we are going to talk about what does it mean to be a good friend. So again, since we were talking about Billy, I want to make a comment about my good friend Billy, who thought it would be a great idea to have a youth-led worship on Super Bowl Sunday. It was very kind of him. I'm not distracted at all this morning. So we've been talking about the book of Job. Last week, we had this great opportunity to listen to a panel of ladies who were talking about all of these great things that we should never, ever say to one another. And the truth is, any of us who's ever suffered, experienced loss, we've all been victims of this, where we've heard words that were hurtful, that were meant to help, or words that were the right words, but the attitude wasn't correct in the way that they were presented. We experience all different kinds of suffering, though. It's really, really challenging to find words that are going to fit every occasion. And how we respond to these moments actually have a significant impact on people's lives. I just think about this panel, we have three women who have suffered greatly in their life in various different ways, and they still carry that. It's not as if that suffering ended when the pain ended. That suffering continues. We kind of bring that with us. It's part of the human experience. And one of the things that we've been doing is a character study on the different friends of Job. Now, if you've ever read the book of Job, you know it's actually three friends and one other guy named Elihu. And it's interesting. He's not really considered a friend in Scripture. We see this in a number of cases. We see it that he's not considered a friend because he's never mentioned as a friend, but he's also not punished like the rest of the friends. Now, this doesn't mean what he said was more helpful or anything like that, but it is something that's really, really interesting about Scripture with him. And so we're going to outline a little bit more about Zophar and Elihu, and we're going to be able to hopefully have a comprehensive look at what all of these friends said. I'm not going to focus so much on the theology because a lot of their theology is wrong. That's kind of the point of the story. But I think what's more important for today is to focus on their attitude. In fact, this is an ever-growing issue in our world where people think, well, I'm right. I have the right opinion. I have the right framework. I have the right policy. And that somehow excuses the attitude that comes with it. It's wrong. Our attitude is equally as important as anything else we do. We know this. You can say all the right things. If you have the wrong attitude, it's not going to be very effective. And today, our first slide is, how do you be a good friend to those who are suffering? And so we have these two guys who decided to also say something to Job. I imagine by now it's starting to feel like Job is being piled onto. I mean, imagine you're this guy, you've lost everything in your life, and you have these friends, and they have lots to say to you. Most of it is incredibly critical. Zophar, at his core, is quite rude. So if you look on here, we have I'm not going to get into these different passages, but if you want a quick outline of his attitude, we see different kinds of things. We see that he's very blunt and direct. I'm sure you guys all have a friend who is like this. He believes in justice. And the justice he believes in isn't just the justice for Job. It's, Job, you are going to see God's justice in this because you are wrong. In fact, the things that are happening to you are really your fault. And then this great virtue at the end, he's quite impatient. In a lot of ways, we could look at Zophar as the poster child of, here is what not to say to people. Here is how not to treat people. And when I study Zophar, I think to myself, I never want to be like this guy. I want to be careful and cautious with what I say to others so that they only think good things about me. Now, I just said something. Did that resonate with anybody? Now, I'm not saying did that resonate in a positive way that makes you feel like Jesus. But do you ever feel like you want to say the right thing so that other people will think good things of you? Because I think that's a little bit of what's going on here. Now, it's hard. This is an old story outside of our culture. But the last thing that I want for people is to be angry with me on top of their suffering. It's not necessarily a bad trait. If we look at this next scripture, this gives us a great example into Zophar's attitude. Next slide, please, Oliver. Next slide. There we go. My troubled thoughts prompt me to answer because I am greatly disturbed. Now, I want you to imagine the worst moment of your life and somebody coming in hot with this. I'm greatly disturbed. I hear a rebuke that dishonors me, and my understanding inspires me to reply. So what's wrong with this statement? Well, it's pretty obvious. He made it about himself. In fact, Zophar does a very good job of making this about himself. He doesn't approach this situation with much empathy, with much patience. Instead, he's frustrated with how he feels dishonored, and he takes that out on Job. And the next slide says, good friends don't make it about themselves. If you were listening to our panel last week, this is one of the critical takeaways. Good friends don't make it about themselves. This might seem incredibly obvious. I can only speculate on why Zophar does this. It may be because he was truly offended by Job. It could be because he was just trying to share a hard truth with Job that he felt he needed to hear. Personally, I think Zophar's ego was probably showing throughout his speech. And we have lots and lots of examples of this. So much so that he wasn't even able to complete his final speech, and that's why Elihu comes in. There is not appropriate sympathy from Zophar for what Job has lost and what he has gone through. There's actually relatively little sympathy. There's a lot of correction. There's a lot of, I know better. There's a lot of, here's what you need to do and the way that you need to think about God. But there isn't a whole lot of the things that we've been talking about, like sitting with a person, listening to the person, and really caring for the person. A good friend would bear this burden with him. But instead, Zophar is a lot more concerned with how this affects him. And this plays out in a lot of different ways in our lives. It could be, I have something to say, you need to hear it. It could also be, I'm just in my head and all I really care about is how I come across in this moment because really I want to be the hero. It's quite arrogant. It's something that we do, but I want to be the hero of your suffering. I want to be the thing that lifts you out of perdition. Good friends don't make it about themselves. When someone is suffering, we should not expect everything to be nice and to be pretty. In fact, there's probably going to be a lot of tears and running noses, a lot of lamenting. And the closer you are to a person who's suffering, the more likely you are to see their real sadness and their real anger. You could also choose, if you want to as a friend, to avoid everything altogether and say nothing, because you might be thinking, well, Ryan, why would I open my mouth and say anything at all? Because most likely I'm going to say the wrong thing. And my response to that is, you're actually probably right. You probably will say the wrong thing. However, does that mean that we should just run away and avoid this? No. No, not at all. Last week, Dana Rippenhagen, she mentioned how she had a friend who didn't visit her in the hospital when she was suffering. And her friend said, "It hurts too much to watch you suffer." And the point she was making was that was very, very hurtful for a friend to not show up for her. And so we have these two things where, as Christians, we ought to show up with one another and bear each other's burdens. But also, as Christians, we need to really watch what we say and sometimes just shut up. Now, I know that's harsh, but these two things can be true at the same time. And when you say things like, "It hurts too bad to watch my friend suffer, so I'm just not going to be around," this is another version of making it about yourself. In some ways, you're making yourself the subject of suffering. Actually, in probably all ways, you're doing that. And the reality is, let's let that person be the subject of the suffering, and let's us be something that can be hopefully helpful. As a Christian brother, sister, this isn't what we do. We show up, we do our best, we try to say the right things, and when words fail, we bear the fallout. It's actually the least we can do for that person. The next slide says, "Good friends bear these small burdens." I think sometimes we focus a little too much on saying the exact right thing or not saying anything at all. I think the better lesson for us is get over yourself. Sometimes you're going to try to help. Sometimes you might actually say the right words at the right time, with the right tone, with the right reading behind it, with the right heart, and they are still going to try to bite your head off. Someone's doing some extra study right now. Oh, it's Ed. For shame. So, this idea, though, that we bear these burdens for them, guess what? When someone's suffering, you're not going to see their most polished professional side. They might bite back at you. They might need to pound your chest. You could get really, really offended by this. You could choose to not be friends with them or to keep your space, or you could just let them be, and you could still be present with them. Take whatever feedback you got, try to be better, but don't let that be an excuse to not show up for people. We must show up for people. Don't be a Zophar. Our next slide is about Elihu. So Elihu's a really, really interesting character in the book of Job. The primary reason is he's not really one of Job's peers. He's not referenced as a friend, and the defining characteristic we see about him is that he's young. And we see in these different passages, he actually comes across far more respectful. Like, you can tell that he is trying to be considerate with the way that he's speaking to Job. Now, this by no means means that he is not critical and wrong. He does a lot of things, and one of the big things we see is that he really, really wants to make it clear that just because he's younger, he still has something that's worthy to hear. And so he's quite a bit younger than the other friends. He feels a bit self-conscious about it, and that's part of where we see what looks like humility. He's quite passionate about what he does, and then one of the other interesting things is he spends a lot of time criticizing the other three friends and saying, "Look, here's how they're all wrong," which basically means, let me tell you how I am right. This is quite an arrogant perspective. He's a young man. In verses 32, verses 4 through 7, we see that Elihu believes that even though he is young, what he says is worth saying. He believes that, and it shouldn't be discounted because of his age. I do think in many ways, at least compared to his friends, Elihu is advanced beyond his years. He's a bit wiser than maybe his peers. And if you get into the theology of what he believes, his view is actually quite a bit more nuanced. And we could spend studies trying to get into what each of these friends and Elihu, what do they think about God? How do they believe God is interacting in Job's life? And there's some good things here. He definitely presents a more humble view of you don't necessarily know what God is thinking, but God's going to do what God's going to do, and that's not wrong. But just because something's right, does that make it helpful? No. One of the problems that Elihu has is he shares the same lack of compassion as the other friends. He displays an extreme level of arrogance when he claims that his words are also God's words. Now, again, imagine you're suffering, you're in this hard moment, and someone says, hey, this is what God told me to tell you. Suck it up. You're wrong. Here's how you need to fix your life. That is going to carry a gravity that is really unhelpful and really scarring. And those are the kinds of conversations for most of us, if any of us have ever left the church at any point in time and said, we're done with this, or we have a family member who's done with it, those are the kinds of conversations that really lead to us leaving relationship with church and Christians. We have to be very, very cautious if we ever try to say something like, God is telling me, or my words are the same as God's. That takes a certain level of arrogance to be there. And that's a really important thing. I don't think that that's an issue in our congregation, but if it is an issue with you, stop it. It's not very good. A lot of Elihu's points might be right, actually. He makes some points that might be right. But insight into a situation doesn't mean that you're going to be helpful. I'm confident Elihu believed he was helping. In fact, more so than Job's other friends, he said some of those true things. But ultimately, his wisdom isn't the issue. The issue is he's not a friend at all. Now hear that. Sometimes I think we think when our words fail, it's a wisdom issue. It's because I didn't have the right words, or I didn't have the charisma, or I didn't have well, more often than not, it's a friendship issue, not a wisdom issue. And we're going to get into more of why I think that. Now, this is a good disclaimer. This is Job according to Ryan. And this is based on my experience and my study. It might not resonate perfectly with all of your experiences, and I know that you guys are kind enough to come and rebuke me later on the areas that I'm wrong. But Elihu doesn't seem to have an established relationship before the storm hit. He kind of comes in as an outsider, giving this observation on what he thinks is wrong. But because of this, because he doesn't have a relationship, you can almost discard everything he said as unimportant. In fact, we actually do this with the Bible, because most of these speeches from all the friends, we don't take this as biblical imperative and ways we ought to behave and ways we ought to think about God. We kind of discard it because we know it's not good advice. Spoiler alert, I know this was written thousands and thousands of years ago, so I think it's been enough time to ruin the end of the story, but we know that Job is exalted by God at the end of this, and his friends are rebuked. His friends are heavily critiqued by God. Having something to say does not mean that you should say it or that you have the right to say it to them. The next slide says, good friends are able to read the room. What does this mean, to read the room? Yeah? What does it mean? Yeah, it's your ability to look out, see what's going on, seeing what cultural pieces might be at play, what relational pieces might be at play, what history might have happened here, and then make a wise decision based on it. But we need to be able to read the room with people who are suffering. A good example of this is you might come in and you might decide, you know what would be really good for them? I'm going to come over, I'm going to eat a meal with them, I'm going to sit with them for hours and hours and hours and talk with them. And then you can show up and you just see that there's tears in their eyes. They're clearly not wanting a lot of company. And you say, well, I want company right now, so we're going to push through. Now, reading the room is saying, I'm going to do what's right for you. You have to listen, you have to observe, and you have to do a whole lot of work to recognize where your place is in their grieving process. A good friend doesn't insert themselves where they don't belong. They don't overstay or understay their welcome. They are able to use context clues to know what you need without having to say a word. In fact, I think most of us know those are the best friends. When we're suffering, it's those friends who know what to do intuitively without us asking, without us knowing. They know when to leave before we have to politely ask them to go away. Those are the ones who feel like real friends. And what's hard about that is you might be thinking at this point, go, Ryan, this takes an extraordinary amount of talent and wisdom and skills to be a good friend. Maybe. Maybe it's something else. It's not reasonable for us to always be on and to always be perfect. And the goal of our helping with people in their suffering and trying to have the right words to help them is not that everything is going to go perfect and everyone's going to look at you and think you're great. The attempt matters. The bearing each other's burdens, being together really, really matters. And the most important takeaway is that a good friend is not just a good friend when you are suffering. This is probably the key point. A good friend, Oliver, shows up before, they show up during, and they show up after the suffering. So I'm going to share a story from my life, which is mostly how I teach. It's always very testimonial, and sometimes I underestimate how much doing this makes everyone know more about my life than I remember sharing. But our life has been a bit of an open canvas, and so when it comes to suffering, it's interesting because there's actually a piece that I think applies here that's really important. And so some of this is a little heavy, so I'll just say a trigger warning on the front end. It's a little heavy, a little bit of what Dana and I have dealt with. But a few months ago, Dana and I, we experienced our third miscarriage. We were devastated. This pregnancy that we had was, it represented sort of a miracle baby for us. I mean, Camry was already a miracle baby for us if you've had any chance to interact with her. Like, we weren't supposed to have her. We weren't going to be able to have her. And this miscarriage was the first time we were pregnant post-cancer treatment. And we didn't know that we were going to be able to have another child. So we were very, very excited. But just like our previous two, we had our appointments, and you go in, and you see that there's no heartbeats, and then you're just left. You go in thinking, I'm about to be a father of two, I'm about to be a mother of two, and you leave feeling very alone, very devastated. And then we also feel, well, this is our third one. Are we even allowed to still feel bad about this? Like, it's kind of feels as normal as breathing. My wife tasked me with a troubling task. Dana, this affects both parties, but it affects the mother differently when you're growing someone inside your body. And she asked me, she's like, I'm going home. Would you please call my parents? I just can't talk to them right now. I want to see them. I want them just to know. And that way I don't have to say it. And, of course, I wanted to do my husbandly duty, and I agreed. And so I called Linda, and we had a great conversation. And she was very sorry about what happened. But then I called Steve. It's not a bad story. And for those who don't know Steve, Steve's my father-in-law. And one thing for those who spent any time with Steve, Steve is not really somebody who wants to dwell in negativity. He's the kind of person when he comes home and he's done with work and you see him on his iPad, he's like looking at something to buy on Amazon, or he's reading a book, his latest John Grisham book or whatever. He's kind of in relaxing mode. And it's just not his favorite thing to sit there in negative conversation or big talk. He likes to relax. He likes to be with his family. Because of that, I was really, really not looking forward to calling him. In some ways, it made me feel insecure because as a son-in-law, I actually felt a lot like a failure because, you know, I married into this family, and here we brought all this trauma. You know, we had this cancer thing. We've had these miscarriages. Camry has her health issues. And I'm like, here we go. It's just one more thing I have to share is negative news. But I did my duty to my wife. And after I shared with him what happened, his response was, Ryan, I'm so sorry that this happened again. It reminds me of how grateful I am for Camry. She is such a joy to all of our lives and is more than enough. So I want to focus on this comment because it's amazing how the Lord works, because since he said this, it's stuck in my head. And what's interesting about it is, in one sense, you could actually argue that this comment breaks the cardinal rule of helping people. Because even though he didn't say at least, it's kind of an at leastism, right? Do you guys understand what that is? An at leastism is where you have some sort of suffering and somebody says, well, at least you're not as bad as that person, or at least this, and as if this somehow makes your suffering better or goes away. And in fact, this is that, when people say that, they usually say it and they're not very, what usually is happening is they're kind of just frustrated, or they don't know what to say, they're flustered, and so that's the first thing they think to say, and it's rarely helpful. However, that wasn't exactly my reaction, even though I know that in the past, and some people, they might react thinking, how dare you? How dare you try to make me feel like my pain isn't validated or that this thing doesn't matter? But when Steve said it to me, it brought me great relief. Unbelievable relief in that moment. Why? Now think about that. Why? Why is it that he could say that and it was the exact right thing to hear? I needed to hear that. I agree with him. My daughter is the most precious thing in my life. She's my best friend. I love that girl. My wife feels the exact same way. We all feel that in our family. I think a lot of you are starting to feel that way about Camry. Is it because Steve is such a great guy? I mean, he's goofy, and he's great. Is it because he was once an elder of the church, and that means he always knows the right thing to say? Is that how that works? No. It's because of the relationship that was established between him and I before this happened. It wasn't because he just showed up when I was suffering. It's because of the relationship I've had with him long before that happened. In fact, my relationship with Steve is very strong. Now, you might see us kind of taking jabs at one another and think, oh my goodness, they don't like each other very much. The truth is actually very different. We like each other very much, and we've always gotten along, and I feel a tremendous amount of respect and affection towards Steve. And part of that, and I'm going to just quickly shift to another story to demonstrate where this relationship really blossomed that way. Before, when I was going through chemotherapy, and that was a really hard phase of my life, Steve made it part of his schedule that every Monday he would come over to our house on his lunch break, and he would just spend some time with me. Now again, I want to remind you, Steve is not the most comfortable person sitting with a cancer patient. That's not exactly his favorite use of his free time. And he'd come over, and he has a very chatty son-in-law, except for when I was going through chemo, I had nothing to say. I couldn't say anything. I was very down, and so here we have Steve, who doesn't really like negativity, having to carry these conversations. His job was to come and take me on a walk, because the doctor said it'd be good to get outside and go on walks, and so he'd kind of take me around like an old sick dog and walk me around the neighborhood. And I did get a bit of a sadistic pleasure out of watching him have to do this, because I knew how uncomfortable it made him. But for me, it meant the world that he was willing to show up. And at that time in my life, when I was going through that treatment, time passed really slowly. And so having any time with another person, it meant a whole lot. Good friends have a relationship before suffering. So when he said those words to me, I knew exactly who he was, and I knew exactly what he meant when he was talking about my family. Okay? That's critical. There was no question about his intentions when he said that to me. I have seen him with his granddaughter, and I knew when he was saying that about Camry that was true. And he knew how I felt about Camry, and he knew that I felt that way, and that was not presumptuous for him. The key to providing support isn't actually the value of your words, but it's the value of your relationship with each other. Even though words can't fix everything, they can be a tremendous comfort. And so through these series, I don't want you to underestimate the power of showing up and saying kind things to one another, because it actually does matter. The problem isn't saying good things to one another. The problem is that sometimes we're doing this to people we don't know very well, or we don't have a lot of trust. And when someone's going through trauma, even people they would normally trust, those relationships get strained because they're dealing with so much. They might be wrestling with life and death. And so when they see you, they're like, you don't understand me, you don't get me, you don't. All of the things that come with suffering, which makes it so important that we have good relationships with one another. Good friends show up during the suffering. When you are at your worst, a good friend is the one who grieves with you, not the one who tells you everything that you did wrong and why God is right to punish you. It's the one who grieves with you, who shows up with you. And they have you on their mind, they have you in their prayers, and they faithfully support you. Good friends remain with you after the suffering is past. How often have we been through hard things, right? And you have your kind of day in the sun, right? Like I remember, like you get cancer, when I did, and then you tell everyone, and then that first day you come to church, it's overwhelming. The amount of support, the love, the care. But then time goes on and people move on with their lives. But your problem doesn't necessarily go away. You're still suffering, but you're just not the hot news item of the week. Good friends stick with you through that. You're not just an object to be fixed, but you are a relationship to be tended to. When suffering first hits, you are going to occupy a lot of space in people's minds. But as time goes on, it'll be less and less and less, and a good friend is with you through all of these phases. So today, we've heard a lot about being a good friend. Job's friends in Elihu are not great examples of how to support one another. But because we are a special church, and I believe that this is a really special church, one of the things as people come in, they say all the time is, I just love how welcoming and hospitable this place is. I think that's become a defining characteristic. I have a final charge for all of you. And I wouldn't be a youth minister if I didn't make this very, very practical. Good friendships, next slide please. Good friendships can start today. Now I know this is really, really simple, and before you get critical of that, remember I'm a youth minister, I'm a simple guy. Good friendships can start today. You might be thinking right now, kind of like me, is I've got a Super Bowl thing to get to. Or you might be thinking, I want to get home because the restaurant opens at 11 and the preacher's going a little long. Stick around. You'll see after, this is not a church that just evacuates immediately after. You have tremendous opportunities right now to tend to some relationships. And so look around. You could do the thing, you can look to the left and look to the right. You can see these different people. And what you're going to see is you are going to see people who you have really strong relationships with. In fact, you might be sitting in your clump of people, right? Because that's kind of what happens at churches. You have your group, you have your people. And that's that's the church inside of the church, and that's the group that you have really close relationships with. You might have looked around and had to avoid eye contact because maybe there's somebody in here you have a stressful relationship with. That's not as fun to talk about. Or maybe there's just people who you've seen for years and you've never gotten to know. We have no idea what people are really going through on a Sunday morning. And I have this opportunity. I can look out and I can see all of you, and I know this, that some of you are really sick. Some of you are sick and know it. Some of you are sick and you haven't found out yet. Some of you are having trouble in your marriage relationships or with your kids. Some of you are just struggling with terrible depression or anxiety. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. And we all come here, we put this face on, and we don't know. And part of the reason we don't know is we don't want to share because it makes us really, really vulnerable to do that. And it's almost impossible to be that vulnerable with people we are really close to and don't have real trust with. I'm not saying that by having wonderful relationships, that guarantees you're always going to say the right things to them. Because it's not. You're still going to mess it up. But it will better prepare you to stay with them throughout that. And again, another lesson to learn from this is be okay with the person's reaction who's suffering. Don't take it personally, even though it is super personal, because they might say, Ryan, you're a big idiot, and I'm mad at you. It doesn't get more personal than that. But it's okay. We bear those burdens with one another. You will still get hurt when you try to help. There will be tremendous stress with the person who's suffering, regardless of your attempts to alleviate it. But that's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to fix them and fix all their problems. We're trying to say, hey, I'm here with you. Let me bear a little bit. Let me bear what I can. Relationships are very tricky and they're hard, but they are the richest part of our lives. And they are the richest part of being a part of a church. In the case of Job, his friends spoke to him as if they knew nothing about what he lost. You never see him mentioning his family by name, for example. Or talking about, it must be really, really hard for you to now be alone. They made it about themselves. They didn't read the room. And they didn't show up for Job during every phase of the suffering. The next slide says, good friends invest in their relationships before the times get hard. And if you want any chance of your words not failing, you need to build up this equity in each other's lives. This could be the difference between causing a huge offense or providing encouragement. I have been very blessed by tremendous relationships, but all great relationships take a lot of time and work. Be patient in those relationships. The people who are patient with you, even on your worst day, these are the people who can truly bear your burdens with you. So if you're suffering, pay attention to the one who offends you and handles that well and says, hey, I'm sorry, you're right. Let me know how I can help. I'm going to give you some space. That might be a person who is a real friend. Not because they're so smart and they always get it right, but because their heart is actually in the right place. As we leave here today, I want you to take time to be grateful for a good friend that you have. When you think about the times in your life you're suffering and think about who were the people who really helped. We had this great opportunity last week. If you weren't here, please go back and listen to the panel. It was such a good experience. And one of the things that they almost unanimously said was they talked about the friends who really helped them, whether it was through prayer or just showing up or saying the right thing at the right time. And also, if somebody here today has been a good friend to you, which I imagine they have, take time to tell them that. Encourage that in them. And this is something I've learned as a young father, is how important it is to encourage good behavior. Sometimes we think things only apply to 2-year-olds, but they apply to us just the same. Take time today to find that person and say, hey, you might not know this, but when you said this to me, that meant a lot. When you dropped off that meal, that meant a lot. When you just sat there and listened to me, that meant a lot. This friendship with one another, this Christian love that we have with one another, is a foundational characteristic of those who follow Christ. So if you're thinking to yourself, well, this all sounds good, but I don't really help other people, or I don't really support people in their suffering, I don't really grieve with them or bear their burdens, know that Jesus did. And I want to remind us of one story, the story of Lazarus, and it's the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. How fascinating is it that we have a God who, being in the very nature of God, right, who is God, who has divine foreknowledge, and not just even divine foreknowledge, he has the power and the intention to say, I am going to raise Lazarus from the grave, don't worry. He still grieves with the family. That's the God we serve, and that is the example that he set for us. I love you all very much, and thank you for being our church to our family. I want you to know we're okay. Carroll's are okay, and a big part of the reason we're okay is because of all of you. Thank you for all that. And one other thank you, because I don't care what anyone says, you could fire me, I don't care. I'm never going to stop telling the youth how proud I am of them. We love you, we support you, and a lot of this messaging, I hope, is for you, because for those of us who've lived a lot of life, we kind of know this stuff. It's a good reminder. But as you guys continue in your life, you're going to come across hard times. I wish you weren't. I wish that all of your relationships were going to be perfect. I wish all of your health was going to be, you were just going to die in your sleep at 150 years old, and it was going to be so easy and nice. I wish that for all of you. But that's just not realistic. And so there's going to be times. And what I want to remind you of is remember these friendships that you have with one another and with this church, and to keep investing in those friendships. Amen?